in times. Doctor, great to have you back. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Drew. It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, Happy New Year to you. I know we didn't get a chance to catch up last week, but I do appreciate the great work you do. And I would strongly encourage people. I know these articles are also archived at the Edmund Burke Institute, and we've done everything from homilies and sermons to the cultural moray that we are in right now. Let's talk a little bit about where we are right now.
Well, Drew, I have to say the situation that you described, I think what's being neglected here is that woman, the mother of the 17-year-old, believes that she is being very cool and that she is actually winning her daughter's admiration and affection.
Right, exactly.
But in reality, what she doesn't realize is that she is putting tremendous pressure on her daughter, because her daughter, whether she can articulate it or not at that young age, essentially understands that she is going to have to parent herself. That is a very heavy burden that we are placing on our children. And I would suggest that a lot of the dysfunction that we are seeing today with issues like anorexia, with issues like self-molestation, this cutting phenomenon, et cetera. There's so many of these maladies, these illnesses that our teens and children are experiencing that are rather new. I would suggest that some of this is the result of the tremendous pressure that children feel, the tremendous emotional and mental isolation of the burden of having to parent themselves because the adults are ashamed of being adults.
Yeah, why is that? I mean, here's a couple things I think are interesting about this generation raising themselves. We live in a culture, and I'm not against plastic surgery, but we live in a culture where everybody wants to maintain youth. It's not good to grow old today. Everybody is trying to look younger. So we've got that. You've got a generation of people who, we live in homes bigger than we've ever lived in, have more cars and have more possessions than our parents or our parents' parents ever had. So you got mothers out there working along with their fathers, and kids are forced now to kind of raise themselves in some respects. And then the third point here, Doctor, and you can comment on those, is the hypersexualization of our culture, where I was sharing a story about a YouTube video where a bunch of 7-year-olds came out and look like a striptease act, to Beyonce. And then also there's reality television shows where they follow these parents and their kids who want to be, beauty pageant stars at the age of 5 and 6. It's just, to me, very, very dysfunctional, and it sends the wrong message to our kids. And you wonder why they're confused and why there's dysfunction.
Well, Drew, it's really the result of a 50-year assault on all our values, which really, gained a lot of steam during the 1960s. The crux of it is that during the 1960s, the radicals began to say that we had to assault authority. All authority was bad. And that, the famous saying, don't trust anyone over the age of 30, as said Jerry Rubin, the famous radical social activist. So there had to be an assault on all authority. To be responsible, to be disciplined, to be thrifty, to be self-reliant, all of this was part of the bourgeois ethos that many of these anarchists and communists despised. And so they created a society in which you had a complete assault on the Christian moral worldview, and in its absence, you don't get no values or no authority. You just get all the wrong values and all the wrong authority. As has famously been said, when you take God out of the picture, you don't get nothing, you get anything. And so that's exactly what we're seeing. So instead of valuing Christian morals and Christian ethics, we have the glorification of vanity, we have the glorification of hedonism, we have the glorification of materialism, because nature abhors a vacuum. And so you take away God, you take away the family, and essentially you're going to have to replace it with something else. And what we've discovered over the last 50 years is what we're replacing it with is really disordered. It's really trash. And very, very sadly, we see that our children are trying to tell us that they don't want this. there was a survey done by the Pew Research Center, and they asked a wide variety of age groups, what do you think of the last decade? And every single age group said that this last decade, the 2000s, is dreadful. It's horrible. It's one of the worst decades in living memory.
Wow.
And in this survey, too, this is very interesting, Drew, they noted that those under 50 have either negative or mixed views of the 1960s and 1970s. So basically, you have young people today who look at the 60s and 70s, and they don't think it was a cool era. They don't think it was an era that provided all kinds of, valuable liberty. They see it very negatively, or they have ambiguous feelings about it. And we have to ask the question why that is.
So my guest today, Dr. Grace Vuoto. Check out her latest article, and again, we'll post it. Whatever happened to adults? An important question for our time. Our conversation will continue. You can join it by dialing in now. Stay with me. I'll be back. America faces a generation of young people who are unwilling to grow up, and we also have got a population of adults that are unwilling to assume responsibility. People are getting married later. They're starting to raise their families later. They're trying to act like kids. And there is some very interesting data that is out now. It's backed up by a wealth of demographic and statistical information. And I'll tell you what, we are living in a very interesting time. This whole phenomena of delayed adulthood and adults who are acting like children are going to have profound impact on our culture, not just economically, but on a number of different levels as well. Social scientists are actually tracking the effects of this as well, from delayed marriage and from social dislocation to the whole litany of other things. My guest today is Dr. Grace Vuoto. Joins me here every other week for our series, Our Graceful Heritage. You can check out her articles at the EdmundBurkeInstitute.org. That's EdmundBurkeInstitute.org. And, of course, we'll have a link at relevantradio.com, keyword Drew. And, Doctor, let's pick it up on where we left off, which is an interesting point that, we have what we've seen 50 years after the sexual revolution, and of course, what the Pew study is now also revealing.
Yes, I thought that the study is really fascinating because a survey of a wide range of different age groups led to this result. The 2000s are seen in a really, really negative terms, and some of the words that were used to describe the 2000s are things like poor, decline, chaotic, disaster, scary, depressing. In other words, they're very dark, gloomy words. And what's also interesting about the study is that those under 50 look at the 60s and 70s, those two really revolutionary decades, with a lot of mixed emotions and a lot of negative emotions, something that baby boomers, those who are actually advancing many of the radical ideas that we deal with today, they don't see that time period as gloomy. They see it overwhelmingly positive. So we see a generational divide. In other words, the young people that are dealing with the consequences of the sexual revolution, they are not so thrilled with it, even though they don't know an alternative. And that's the really sad fact. That's what I've been emphasizing from the beginning, is the kind of pressure that we put on the youth, because they know that something isn't quite right, but they don't know enough to know how to fix it.
That really is very interesting. I know that you saw the movie The Black Swan, and you actually wrote a little bit about that. As I was reading through your article today, I thought you made some great comparisons in terms of what that movie reveals. And not everybody has seen that, so why don't you share a little bit about that critically acclaimed film, and we can talk about that as well.
Yes, Drew, I do have to warn your audience that there are some scenes there that are really quite graphic, and I wish that the director had omitted them because they're not necessary. They were rather sexually graphic. However, eliminating those scenes, I must say that Black Swan is, I think, the best movie of 2010, and I'll tell you why. It has been nominated for 4 Golden Globe Awards, and I'm actually really rooting for this picture to win. It's been nominated for Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Director, and Best Supporting Actress, and that is definitely with merit. I'll tell you why. This movie really shows that America's youth are lost. And they are lost precisely because the adults around them are modeling very destructive values. So the movie is essentially about a ballerina, and she becomes the star, the leading lady in the production of Swan Lake. And as she prepares to star in this production, she puts tremendous pressure on herself to be perfect. She must be physically perfect. And she has, on the one hand, her mother, who was a former ballerina, who encourages this kind of perfectionism and the desire to be, publicly acclaimed. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, the other elder person in her midst is the director of the company, and he, too, has very high standards of excellence that he imposes upon her, but at the same time, he's also very lusty, and he seems to be, playing sexual games with the young girls that are around him. So this young girl, basically the character's name is Nina, she begins a dark, dark descent because she senses that something is terribly wrong. She wants very much to please her elders, but at the same time doesn't have the coping mechanisms to deal with the stress of trying to rise to those standards. At the same time, doesn't ultimately respect the authority figures around her, but doesn't have any other alternative. And the results are tragic. So what I think this movie shows brilliantly, I think more brilliant than any other movie that I've seen, is how much pressure there is on young people when adults fail to model good values, and when in fact they model some values that are very, very poor. And what we see here is this, Drew. In the 1960s, they tried to tell us that the young people are really going to thrive if we simply eliminate all authority figure. We should be teaching our children to question authority. What happens in reality is that there's always some kind of authority there by the sheer fact that the young must follow their elders. So there is going to be some kind of authority. It is impossible to eliminate all authority. So these children are being raised with this sense that they have these distorted values being modeled, so there is some kind of authority imposed upon them, and at the same time, there is nobody there acting like an adult to help them to discern how they should be growing up, how they should be adopting positive values. How can they cope with the distorted values that the authority figures are imposing upon them? You see, it's all well and good to tell the young of the 1960s question authority when most of these kids came from homes that had already taught them the basic difference between right and wrong. But how can you have that same standard applied to the young in which we have a different context? The basic difference between right and wrong is not being taught. Adults are imparting some of their values, whether they want to, whether they believe it or not, whether they want to do it or not. What you have is sheer chaos, sheer pressure on the young, and you have a psychological breakdown. And that's what the movie shows in an absolutely brilliant, genius way.
How do we get to this point, though, where we have really lost those principles of right and wrong, and things have become so twisted and deviated?